I would like to welcome you all to the book discussion of Radhaland and Worlds Beyond, poems by Ramakanth, Rath, organized by the Jindal India Institute in collaboration with the Jindal School of Languages and Literature. I am Raghav Dua and I serve as the program coordinator of the Jindal India Institute. I will be serving as the moderator for this session. We are also joined today by a special partner in this endeavor, the Sahitya Akademi, which is India's National Academy of Letters, whose beautiful logo you see on the screen, designed by none other than the legendary Satyajit Ray. This day is dedicated to the ways of the heart, to pain, joy, love, longing, to the spectrum of emotions that elude easy explanations, to the complexity of those invisible eyes that see beyond what our material eyes are capable of. A line from the Little Prince describes it well. It is only with the heart that one can rightly see. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Today is devoted to poetry, a medium through which the eyes of the heart find their voice. We will explore the English translations of such one voice, that of the renowned Indian poet Ramakanth Rath, who is also described as the most important living poet in Odia. Ramakanth Rath was born in Puri, in Orissa, in 1934. He retired as the Chief Secretary of State of the state of Orissa in 1992, after having served as the Secretary to the Government of India. He is a recipient of India's third highest civilian award, the Padma Bhushan, and numerous other awards, most notably the Sahitya Akademi Award in 1977 and the Saraswati Samman in 1992. He served as the President of Sahitya Akademi from 1998 to 2003, and also earlier as its Vice President from 1993 to 1998. He received the Sahitya Akademi Fellowship in 2009. He is a poet of many celebrated works such as Sri Radha, Sri Palataka, Saptamarutu, and among others. The subject of our discussion today, Radhaland and Worlds Beyond, is a collaborative translation effort led by Ambassador Dr. Jitendra Nath Misra to bring to light the evocative poetry of this renowned poet. We will discuss today what Rath found essential, what merited his consideration, and what found place in his exquisite compositions. Please allow me to introduce the panel for the day. We are joined here by the editor and co-author of this anthology, Ambassador Dr. Jitendra Nath Misra, and three expert discussants. Ambassador Misra is a senior fellow at the Jindal India Institute. He is a former ambassador and professor of diplomatic practice at the Jindal School of International Affairs. Our first discussant today is Professor Sukrita Paul Kumar. Professor Paul Kumar is a distinguished poet and scholar. She is the guest editor of Indian Literature, the English language journal of the Sahitya Akademi. She has held numerous prestigious positions, including the Aruna Asaf Ali Chair at Delhi University, and is widely recognized for her poetry collections like Vanishing Words and Country Drive. She is also the co-editor of Routledge UK's Writer in Context series, which includes a notable work on the eminent writer Krishna Sopti. Our second discussant for today is Ms. Jayashree Mishra Tripathi. Ms. Mishra Tripathi is an accomplished author and poet, and has enriched her literary voice through 30 years of her life in diverse cultures. Passionate about adult literacy and women's empowerment, she identifies as an arranger of words in narrative verse and short fiction. Finally, we have one of JJU's very own experts on poetry, Professor Akshay Kale. Professor Kale is a prominent Indian Hispanist specializing in Hispanic literatures with an emphasis on poetry. He has received his Master of Philosophy from Jawaharlal Nehru University and has conducted conferences on Latin American poetry at the University of El Salvador and San Carlos University, Guatemala, as well as the Jawaharlal Nehru University. He was invited as a Hispanist of eminence to conduct a keynote address on the poetry of the Peruvian poet Cesar Vallejo by Instituto Cervantes, New Delhi. To kickstart the event, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Dennis Layton, the Dean of the Jindal School of Languages and Literature, to deliver the opening remarks for the session.
Am I audible? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Raghav. First of all, thanks to the Jindal India Institute for inviting me to be part of this event, distinguished gathering of translators and literature experts. I'm happy to represent the School of Languages and Literature at this event. It makes sense that we are here, and I'm happy that my colleague Akshay Kale has been will be involved as one of the discussants. Okay, so This is kind of a pathetic excuse in a way, but I'm not a translator. The only language other than English that I at least once knew well enough to at least think that I could translate in one way or another is German. I have a smattering of other languages, including French, Russian, Italian, a little bit of Spanish, and my Hindi is bad, as my students know, and my Bangla also, but I have a smattering of languages used in Italy and in India and other parts of the world. And as I was discussing with two of our guests here, Jayashri and Sukrita, it's interesting that after all of these years, Hindi is still the fastest growing language in India. For the past 20, 23 years, it's growing in usage even more rapidly than English, and it's being used largely as what we would call L2 or L3. In other words, people whose main language is Odia or Bengali or Tamil or whatever. It was a surprise to me when I encountered this information about this several years ago, that Hindi is still very prevalent. So for that reason alone, the work of translators in India, I think, is of high importance, and the centrality of institutions like Sahitya Akademi, I think, is unquestionable. This is a country where there are 12 to 14 major languages, and by major I don't mean more or less important, I mean simply in terms of the number of speakers, languages that have, several million or perhaps a few crore speakers. 30 to 40, again, minor languages in terms of the number of speakers of those languages, and countless dialects. And anyone who is involved in translation and is particularly interested in, the historical or the history of languages realizes the fluidity of these various languages, right? Even someone whose Bengali is as poor as mine can understand some Assamese, some Odia, right? At least dialects of those two languages are close enough to kind of standard Bengali that the languages are mutually comprehensible. And that, of course, is true of dozens of languages in this country, which makes the task of the translator actually quite, you might think it makes it easier, but it also presents special challenges because of particular nuances and contextual differences. I'm regularly attend presentations and discussions by translators where people highlight that issue, where context is everything. So again, one would think that the job or the work or the role of the translator in India, or someone who works in India, lives in India, and deals with Indian languages on a regular basis, that the job is secure. And I think it's really wonderful that Professor Jitendra Nath Misra and his collaborators in this project have taken the time to bring into English the work of a prominent, perhaps the most important, or certainly one of the very most important writers in modern Odia literature. So without further ado, I will leave it to the experts to discuss this collection. And I'll just take the opportunity to announce another event that is happening this week. The Center for Translation, Print, and Publishing Studies has its inaugural event this Thursday on the 3rd at 1:30 p.m. And our guest speaker will be Rakshanda Jalil, a prominent writer, poet, translator. So I hope some of you who are here today can attend that event as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. To begin, I welcome Ambassador Misra to take us through the journey of coming up with this book, his views on the lives and works of Ramakanth Rath, and anything else he would like to share.
So thank you very much for that. And firstly, I'm very heartened by the very substantial and large turnout, because poetry is it's a struggling genre. We all know that. But as long as humans are alive, the human race is there. And as long as we sing, and in India we sing at the slightest excuse, as we know, as long as there is song and music, there will always be poetry. It will never disappear, no chance. And of course, there is always a co-constituency for poetry, and that was the struggle of producing this book, of being the editor and translator. One of the translators. My wife is another one, and there are 11 other translators. This project has been in my head ever since really I became an adult, started reading Ramakanth Rath's poetry, and I was very impressed and deeply affected at a young age. Though I don't have formal training in Odia as such, but I'm bilingual. I mean, I speak, read, and write, self-taught. So, since the 21st century, the beginning of the century, I've had this dream of producing a book, an omnibus collection of his best works from different volumes. The problem is that Orissa, I am a native Odia myself, but Odias are not, how do I put it? It would be to denigrate them to say they are not intellectual, but in a different way, they don't care. It's a culture where they don't really care. The Bengali culture is very different, at least when it comes to the printed word. Odias are very good at creating art, sculptures, music, dance, but probably they're historically not so much the written word. But of course, after independence, as I had a conversation with Dean Sudarshan about this when the book was published, that poetry, yes, novels, less. They've had some outstanding poets, and many of them were civil servants because the best talent went into the civil service. So Ramakanth Rath was one of them. He started writing at a very young age when he was collector of Phulbani. He used to meditate in the deep, dark night and hearing the jackals and the owls and the wildlife and sometimes the calls of humans. And he told me about that. And so he started writing from a young age. He had no intellectual mentor. He's a self-made man. And he also started writing short stories, but he gave it up because poetry was his real calling. And each volume of his, I just want to show you, I brought these, some of these volumes. Sandigdha Mrugaya, Sarala Hruda Ganita, Sri Radha, Sri Parataka. Just look at the how slim the volume is. 80 pages. An average of 5 years to compose. Between Sri Radha and Sri Parataka, 7 years, the longest. And Sri Parataka, according to me, is his real masterpiece. Now, why did I do this? Because somebody has to do it. And somebody has to volunteer. But that's not a good enough reason. The reason is that he's a world-class poet, period. Whether he's one of the best in the world, I mean, I wouldn't like to pose the question that way, one of the best in India. And in my reckoning, certainly the best poet of his generation after Sachi Rautrai in the first half of the 20th century, Ramakant Rath definitely in the second half of the 20th century. No question about it. But others might disagree. Now, I've been dreaming of producing this volume at least since 2005. In 2007, luckily, when I was in Vietnam, we got a Vietnamese volume in Vietnamese done. And that was great. So this book became accessible in Vietnamese before it became accessible, so to speak, in English, which is very strange, though we are an English-speaking nation. Now, that's partly the problem here is that Orissa is, a state back or beyond. It's very far away. It's in the eastern extremity of India and not so well known. That has been a struggle for Orissa historically. And Odia people are very reticent people. They don't push themselves forward in anything. They are solid but reticent. So that also didn't help. Of course, Ramakant Rath himself had translated a fairly large number, 50 odd of his own poems. And they were published, including by Authors Press. But I don't know what kind of impact they had beyond the immediate, the small circle of people who read poetry. And I don't think he pushed hard. He's not a person who could ever push hard his own products or anything. So there was no marketing. This book is actually doing quite well for poetry, the one. But then we have had to make the effort. So the problem was that I approached Jitendra Nath, who is one of the translators, and others. Jitendra Nath is he's a proven translator, but of prose. And Bikram Das came very late into in the day because he's done Paraja, the great novel by Gopinath Mahanti, and that's an excellent translation, really. But that was done 20 or 30 years ago, and he's now 90. So how do you find the translator? So Pinaki, so I tried to talk and cajole people into it. Yes, he's a great poet, we'll do it, and all that stuff. But nothing happened. For 20 years, nothing happened. Then Pinaki came into this, Ramakanth Rath's son, and he said that I will bankroll this project. And we will pay very generously. I said, wow. Then the project is on. He said, I'll pay you. I said, of course, you're not going to pay me, and I'm not going to accept anything. But if you pay the others, I'd be grateful because I can get people. Ideally, we should get one person doing everything, right? To have a constancy in the meaning of the poetry, a consistency in the quality. But we couldn't find that person, though we paid very generously. And none of these people, frankly, have translated poetry. The 13 people, they are all first-timers as far as poetry is concerned. So that's something to note. Prose, yes, Jatin Naik is a highly decorated translator. But I reckon that Jatin, Amlendu Misra of Lancaster University, and Chandras Chaudhary, whose Arzi, the Dwarf, was shortlisted by World Literature Today as one of the 70 most important novels of the 21st century in India, in English. He's great. But all these people have done prose. They're either writers in English or translators of prose from Odia into English, as Jatin. Amlendu, social science. But he's written a book called The Landscape of Silence. And he describes Lawrence of Arabia. It's about violence, sexual violence against men in war, which nobody had written about as a book. Fantastic book, sheer poetry. So he was very, very reluctant to do it. He said, I can't do poetry, and translate. I said, you are the right man to do it. So he did it. So we commissioned these people, but we actually found 27 people who approached us after the advertisements. Most of them couldn't stand the test of quality. Some of them of integrity, even. And so we zeroed it on people who have a proven talent, at least in prose, translation of prose. So that's how the project began. We signed the contracts, I think, in 2020. Then the COVID years, and it was very difficult also to get timely submissions, and you will know that very well. People promise, but they don't follow the time. It's very difficult. So we had to really push hard, and then we got the manuscripts. Now, another problem was Ramakanth Rath, for some reason, was of the view that he should be the one who should be translating and not somebody else for a very long time. Now, how do you crack that one? Because he was more possessive about his poetry than, he loved his poetry more than his wife, probably. I don't know. So Ramakanth Rath, I said, why are you being so possessive? Come on. You think that others can't do it? Why don't you give them a chance? No. I'm not interested in that sort of thing. Then after Pinaki came into this, I told him about it, and I said, look, you have to have some trust in me. I will get it done. And the deal is this, that everything I'll run past you. If you don't approve, it doesn't get done. So I, as an editor, followed a very, very rigorously professional path, which is commission the works, get the manuscripts, edit, and I must say I have heavily edited all the poems, heavily, not just lightly. The reason is that I wanted to bring them into something like my style, so that there is consistency, because there are 13 people, a motley crowd. So we did that. And then I'm very, very fortunate that all the translators were very sporting. And they accepted my interventions, in some cases 6 or 7 drafts. 6 or 7 drafts. They all accepted my interventions happily, and they were very kind, because sometimes they may not agree. And after that, I took the final product that I had to Ramakanth. This poem is not mine. This poem is not yours? No, it's not my poem. Of course not. And I said, oh my God, that's why he didn't want anyone else to translate his poems except himself. I said, what's wrong with it? He said, I have said this and that in the book, but the poem is not saying this and that. I said, you are being very literal, sir. He said, that's what I want this translation to be. So he wanted a very literal, word-by-word translation. Now, there can be many views about translation. One is literal, one is idiomatic, one is fantasy, one is murdering the whole thing and creating something different. But at the end of the day, the translator is his own author. It's a new work, according to me, according to my experience in this. Every translator needs to be respected in creating a new work, even if it is not his original work. So I told Ramakanth that. I said, how do you resolve this problem? He said, I don't know, but it's not my work. It's not my poem. I said, if you want me to use only your poems, I'm not going to do that, because people have worked very hard. But what I can ask them is to rewrite and to be as true, almost literally, to the original as possible. So that happened. And that's where the interventions came in, because when you become so rigid, it doesn't work. You have to have a certain degree of nuance, interpretation, sound, music. You have to add things. So that's where that was the other challenge for me as the editor also. So this was the second round, not the first round. The first round was the heavy editing with the translator. Then after Ramakanth. But I'm very proud to say that he has certified, except 1 or 2, because he's very old now, he has certified all these poems. And in the case of some of the poems, including Jitendra Nath's, Amlendu Misra's, as well as Chandrahas Chaudhary, Sindhupala Chaudhary's, and myself and Ratnaprabha Misra, my wife, better than the original. He has written on the manuscript, and I treasure them. And coming from this great man, I'm humbled. Better than the original. And I have kept them in his own words, with his hand shaking, but his own text. And he liked all of them. So the product is there before you. Let's hear what you think about it.
Before we move on to the other discussions, sir, is there any particular passage, lines, or a set of lines that have intrigued you the most, perhaps triggered deep introspection, or transformed something in you upon reading the poems in original Odia? Perhaps you would like to read some of those lines?
I would love to read one passage. Jayashri, may I ask you to do us the honor of reading the English, maybe? I read the Odia. Sri Parataka 37, page 135. And Sri Parataka 36. As I said, and Professor Kale will have something more to say on that, so I won't preempt you here. But these are among my favorite poems, and I regard them as great poems. Let me read to you in Odia, because the time has come for us to understand one another in India. I talk about the second consensus. I think that will be better, because it's not simultaneous interpretation like the United Nations. So I'm going to read in Odia, because I would really request you to try and listen and understand. I'll read slowly, because we need to be aware, even of the sounds, even if you don't understand the language, of the great literatures of other languages. Unless we Indians translate each other and have a proper conversation among ourselves, how can we, we have such great literature that we don't know about, forget about the world, because we don't have translations. So I'm going to read Sri Palataka 36 and Sri Palataka 37. Sri Palataka is Paligola, one who runs away, one who's always running away, Mr. Runaway, Mr. Escapist. That's what it means. So here it is. And I will also pause and explain a little bit. Pani niya, pani niya. Pani means water. Pani. Niya mane take. Pani niya, pani niya. He Pitru Purusa. Pitru Purush. Gyati bhai mane niya. Gyati bhai means the clan. Gyati bhai mane niya. Satru pakhya o mitra pakhyara. Juddhare nihata sanya senapati mane. Pani niya, anna deli. Annaniya, a Juddha Khetrare. Can you understand? More or less? Paniniya, a Juddha Khetrare on this battlefield.
I would suggest that you just read it as a poem.
Okay, I'll read it.
Because then the English version anyway is going to...
Okay, good. I think that's a good point. So I'll repeat. Paniniya, Paniniya, he Pitru Purusa. Gyati Bhai Maniniya. Satru Pakhya o Mitra Pakhyara Juddhare Nihata Sanya Senapati Mane. Pani niya, anna deli, anna niya, e juddha khetrare. Pani deli, anna deli, tama uddeshyare. Au jodi kichi chaha, mate kaha nai. Mu nadei pari thiba lamba talikare, anyana samagri au najodi leuta, munde pani muthe anna nei. Ete barsha kateli mu tamari sangare, puni to tamari sange rahibi mu dina kete pare. Mo pakhare anya kichi thile mu tamaku nadei kahanti kaana leuti jibaku. ମୋ ପାଖରେ ଯାହା ଅଛି ପାଣି ଆଉ ଅନ୍ନ ଛାଡ଼ିଦେଲେ ସ୍ୱର୍ଗତ ଆତ୍ମାଙ୍କୁ କ'ଣ ତାହା କିଏ ଦିଏ କେବେ ହେଲେ ତାକୁ ଧରି ଆଜୀବନ ମୁଁ ଚଳପ୍ରଚଳ ହେଲି ସିନା ଯେତେବେଳେ ତାକୁ ଚାହିଁ ଦିଏ ମୁଁ ଭୁଷୁଡ଼ି ପଡ଼େ ଦୁଲଦାଲ ସେତେବେଳେ ମୋର ଆର୍ତ୍ତନାଦ ଝୁଣି ଦିଏ ଆକାଶ ପାତାଳ ପାଣି ଦେଲି ଅନ୍ନ ଦେଲି କାନ୍ଦ କାନ୍ଦ ହୋଇ ଏତିକି ବି ପାଇବାର ଆଶା ମୋର ନାହିଁ ଏଥର ସ୍ୱସ୍ଥାନେ ଯାଅ ଦେଖ ସୂର୍ଯ୍ୟ ବୁଡ଼ିବା ଉପରେ देख मो निज पाई भी पानी नहीं अन्न नहीं किछि नहीं खाली अछि जहाँ मु तुमको न दे रखिली Thank you for telling me that. I forgot momentarily.
Water, have some water. Couple your palms, the droplets will tip over your ancestors and bless you. Here is some water, dear soldiers, felled by truth and by untruth. Command is for and command is against us, warriors smothered by doubt. Here is my offering of water and rice for you, and you, even you. Do not ask for more, I am out of stuff. Turn back with the water and rice. Our years together have dissolved like shadows, no point thinking about it. I shall join you soon, thus do not ask for more. Where you rest, my possessions are of no use. Believe me, I nest in these, but feel the heat just seeing them off in the chaos of a terminal terror. I will shed a tear for you with this offering. Think of it when my time comes. None will be left to give me even this. So let it go, just take what I have. The sun will go down any moment. Suddenly, I'm clutching at straw, absolutely nothing. Nothing remains for me, not a grain of rice, not a pitcher of water. All I have is what I never gave you. Right? Beautiful poem.
Because time is short, I had another poem, but maybe...
We can do it later, perhaps.
Yeah, later.
Yeah? That's
I would like to invite Professor Sukrita Palkumar for her intervention on the book, what themes she liked the best, and any criticisms that she has. Thank you, ma'am.
I don't think I'm going to really talk about the best and the worst and the criticism and so on, if you don't mind. I'll just go into my own spiel like all of us do in the classroom, don't we? We are loud thinking, and I will do some loud thinking here. I have always had a lot of respect for Ramakanth, for whatever snippets I have read here and there, but my apology that I am not an Odia. I do not read the language, And so I am an outsider who became an insider to the poems that I read. And I think I love that because, in a way, that's my job, even as the editor in the context of Indian literature. I get material from a lot, by the way, from Odia people. It's not right that Odia people are not active. It's not right that they are reticent. It's all wrong what you said. You know why I'm saying that? Because the amount of material I'm getting from Odia, it's unbelievable. In fact, if I keep that on one side, all the other languages is on the other side in India. I think there is a reason for it. So in that way, that's where you are right, because I think for a long time, Orias were like that, probably. Now it is almost with a vengeance, yeah. It's almost with a vengeance that people are translating. So I'm getting a lot of material from Oriya, fiction, short stories. In fact, my fear is that people will start saying, why are you publishing only Oriya, translations? So I'm making sure that it's not happening. So that's good news for you, because I think a lot of translations are happening now. In fact, even Jatin Naik's own son is now into translation in a very big way. One after the other, he's sending me short stories and books to be reviewed, etc. Anyway, the point is that I think this book, as it comes, Radhaland and Worlds Beyond. First and foremost, I really want to congratulate you for having chosen this particular. And one of the jobs of the editors generally is to choose, isn't it? To select. And that's very primary to the whole idea of translation. Most of the times, these translations are done not out of one's own volition. It's either commissioned or, you have money coming in from somewhere and therefore such and such, maybe embassy is giving money, so you end up translating that particular, country's work or language or whatever. But where it is a labor of love, here it seems to be a labor of love. And that's what you see, that it has gone through the fire of, extraordinary labor. And that labor comes out of passion. And if it comes out of passion, that is the fire you require, isn't it? Of writing poetry as much as, if not more, in translation. Because in translation, it's not ultimately what you're doing is, in one sense, for the other, not for yourself. So there is a certain kind of selflessness and humility that you require as a translator, because you have to become totally invisible. In the translation, you have to become invisible. It's not your style. A poet, when I'm sitting down to write my poem, I want it to have my signature style, right? I want that somewhere. I'm trying to find my own voice. In a translation, you are actually following the voice of another. And yet, I will not say that it is only mimicking or replicating. It's not replicating. Because there also, as a translator, you are choosing words. The tools you are using. Negotiation is taking place. Mediation is taking place out there. But you try to be objective. There has to be humility for that. And particularly for a poet like this one, like for me, I remember when I wanted to translate Kurutul and Haider, she said, I translate my own stuff, please stay away. She actually told me that, And she could say that to me because she thought of me as the daughter of her friend who was my father, right? So she could deal with me like that. Stop it, don't do it. And she would do it to many people. So there are authors who are very possessive about their original flavor, and they don't care. Genuine authors don't care. Today's world is slightly different, if I may say, because authors are also saying, okay, I'll give you money, please translate. Please translate. But he also belongs to modern times. But a genuine author is, yes, possessive, not of himself and his ego and all that, but if it is something very original, it is the idea of retaining that originality. Because the danger is that somebody is going to trespass. Somebody is going to smother it, And you don't want that. You know, you put your soul into it, your body into it, you've gone through fire, the trial of fire, you know, of creativity. And you don't want to compromise. You just don't want to compromise. Don't translate if you can't, you know. There are other authors who say that. If you can't do it like in your case also, he said, no, this is not my poem, right? Yeah, because there is that, not just a narrow kind of possessiveness, but as I said, it's like safeguarding originality, creativity of sorts. However, therefore, and I think in our own country, we've had a lot of problems in terms of translation because I think we have never honed the ability of translating. We have not honed it. We have not trained people. We have not, on the one hand, I'm talking about labor of love. On the other hand, I'm also talking about training, right? Because that training is lacking. Usually it's lacking because the academic world never took it on. Except for one or two universities now there are probably 5 or 6, in the country where you have translation, either translation centers or you have a course, full-fledged course in translation, etc., etc. Otherwise, translation itself is invisible. But languages, you have 22 scheduled languages, and according to Professor G. N. Devi, how many languages? We have 1,200 and something languages. I mean, it's a mind-boggling kind of scene. Some of them languages live only in the oral traditions also, right? Some have the script, some don't have the script. So there are so many languages. Now what do you do? So if translation is not honed, and that's why it takes so long also, because you said 6 or 7 times drafts that you had to create, not only to satisfy the poet, but to satisfy your own self also. Yes. Because as an editor, it's particularly if the author is living, it is so difficult to translate to your satisfaction, because this is a challenge that the author is going to also look at it, right? And by the way, I also had that problem because my father's book that I translated, Sleepwalkers, I had so many, 1,000 fights with him. Because he would say, no, you are incorrect. This is not how it should be, And finally, I had to say, okay, father or whatever, I am not going to listen to you, And I'm going to do my stuff also in this. You have to, because the temper of English is different from the temper of, not that therefore you compromise totally. And that is where I appreciate your translation so much. And I'm sure your editing, you must have really painstakingly gone into those drafts only because it's not just uniformity, but a certain level of excellence that you require. And that is why I was looking at Chandra Has's, translation, for instance. Excellent. He and his wife probably, mother. He and his mother.
Yes.
They have done it. Wonderful. So she would have understood that Oriya and that Oriya, which is of that generation. So she would have really given him the right feedback for what kind of, words should be chosen. So it's a task to be, it's a challenge to be taken on. And I think this was, in his translation, I noticed, particularly in his translation, he's also taking liberty with English language. Go ahead and take that liberty. No longer is it, again, his master's voice now. I was going to say her, master's voice, but now again we have King of England, right? So his master's voice we don't have to listen to him, we have our own English today. And it becomes our own English as a bhasha, one of the bhashas. It's now one of the bhashas. If we don't recognize that, then either we are going to be snobs because we are going to mimic Britishers, right? And we are in the English department, right? So that posture. If we are humbly English scholars, very humbly, and we know that we don't have to be slaves to the Britishers, then our language is going to be an original English, right? And in that case, you can play around. Anantamurthy used to say, abuse English language. इसका मतलब ये नहीं था कि गाली दो, not that. He said English language can be played around with. Abuse it. You know, you think you are abusing it, but you are not abusing it. You are playing with it, right? And that ability to play with it, that confidence should be that of the native of England. The same kind of playing around. They can do whatever. And because they don't have that feeling that, you know, it is that English that we need to. You know what Raja Rao had to say, isn't it? Raja Rao said that. He said, you write in English, but don't think like English, right? So if you are an Indian writing in English, then the punctuation will also be different. One whole page would have perhaps no comma, no full stop. Why? Because that is how Kannada is spoken, Raja Rao's Kannada. So Kannada would be spoken like that. And therefore he wrote like that in Kanthapura. You know, his English was like that. So if we have that, and to come back to that point, Chandra has this thing also, and partly in yours also I noticed, that वो जिसको हम उर्दू में हिंदी में कहते हैं ना तोड़ मरोड़, you know, we're twisting it, squeezing it, and doing what we want to, because what we want is the essence of that, right? So that kind of play thing needs to happen with English language. And if we give that liberty to ourselves, that license to ourselves, only then can we be creative in translation. Otherwise, we cannot be. We will only be trying to we will be anglicizing the Oriya or Urdu or whatever we are translating. Then we are anglicizing it. So that's not the job of a translator. And since you had multiple translators, God help you. Because I have done that kind of work, so I know what that means. I've edited a lot of translations, fictions, you know, and have published in by various publishers and all that. But in order to bring around a certain kind, I don't want to use the word uniformity, but consistency of quality. In order to bring that around, you really have to work very, very hard as an editor. Though your name is only going as the editor, and people say, oh, it's so simple. Take about 10 translators, distribute the work to them, put it together as an editor and publish it. No, you cannot do that. You have to go through, actually, genuinely edit the translation. And to my mind, I've always found that very, very useful. The editing, even if, you know, formally one is not an editor and you are translating a book, I have always done that. I have hired somebody, paid somebody to edit my work. Why would I do that? Because another pair of eyes is required. You also need objectivity, which the editor would bring in. That, you know, subjectivity has to be brought down as much as possible in terms of translating, because translation requires interpretation. It requires interpretation, but it does not require paraphrasing in poetry. People start doing that. They start paraphrasing in English. Well, English fellas will not understand, they say. That's why we are doing it. What do you mean, English fellas? Let them not understand if they don't want to make an effort. A translated text, let it be read as a translated text. But the English courses that we teach and we learn and we do, that is not being told to us. Homer, did we ever, till recently, nobody knew that it was translated. Homer was translated. You know, earlier on in my zamana, it was not like that. Nobody told us that. Because it was just taken as a classic text, you know, by Homer. It's only now that we have become conscious that the translator has played a very big role in that. So, yes, in a way, you know, when you are translating, you are not translating for people who are Odia people. You are translating for people like us who don't know the language. So the translation also has to stand on its own legs. It has to have autonomy of existence, right? So now what is the trick? How do you do it? On the one hand, the translation has to be very close to the original. On the other hand, it has to stand on its own legs, you know. So that is the negotiation that one needs to do very, very carefully. And that is why I thought when you read the English version and when he had read, I wanted that poem to come straight as it is. And when you did that, I could see that there was also some attention paid to the sound, if not the sound per se directly, but also to meter and rhythm. So there was a rhythm that when you're reading, fortunately you asked her to read. If it had been somebody who doesn't know poetry very much, would mess it up, you know. So you were reading it in such a way that it almost matched that sound, that rhythm. So rhythm is important, meter is important, the intrinsic meter, even if formally it is not there. So I think all in all, I can go on, but I can go on, but should we stop so that there can be a second round also?
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah?
Sure.
Yeah. So I think there has to be, there are politics of translation in terms of choosing. There is commerce in translation in terms of seeing what the market desires. There is also aesthetics in translation. Aesthetics which you bring in the whole question of what are the poetics of translation. It is a skill as much as an art, How the tools would be found first, and then the tools have to be used in such a way that the words are chiseled and chosen in the right way. So I think all in all, if we have this kind of a baggage, reading material or study material created, and then of course practice. It has to be practice also. Certain things happen almost like in a dream you say, okay, this is how it can be translated, Just like in the original writing you have to do. Suddenly the lines will come. Otherwise you are stuck forever. You can't find the right words, But sometimes it just comes in a flow very beautifully. And that coming in the flow, one needs to be both humble and receptive. And openness. Receptivity for that. So I really found that 2, 3 of the, from amongst all of them, your translations, Chandrahas's, Jatin's translations, they stand out. They stand out. Because you can make that out. And even if you have made so much of an effort to make everybody come onto that level, you can make out who is doing what and how, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. As the only other bilingual panelist fluent in English and Odia, I request Ms. Jayashree Mishra Tripathi to please share her thoughts.
Thank you so much. Can I look at you here? Right. So I'm from Odisha. Though I spent my childhood in London, I came back and really wanted to study Odia because, you didn't want to be called, she's from back home, she's from back there, like from the British time and whatever. And that's why I studied Odia as a subject, as a second language for my senior Cambridge, ancient times. I didn't do very well, but anyway, I stuck it out and I tried. So I first read Ramakanth's poetry in India while studying for the senior Cambridge. And at that time I was about 14 and 15, and his words were very, very interesting, and they did evoke some emotions, but I think after I've lived my life in so many decades, I could understand them even better now when I go back to them. Now, he himself translated his poems in 1984. I'm talking about Sri Radha, which is my favorite. All right, so Sri Radha I'm talking about. And in 84, then I got to read more of his poems. And what I must say is that I think many of the women here will, I'm not saying it because it caused a number of comments about, feminism and all that, but yes, he was called a confessional poet, and you've all heard, the movement started in the 60s, 50s and 60s, right, Sugrita, in the USA and UK, and everything that happens there trickles into India at that time. Although we sort of read Eliot and, Ezra Pound, and we all wanted to write like them and be, famous for our words. But Ramakanth Rath's poetry, and he has often said this, and that's where we talk about, this utter simplicity and lyrical nature of his poems in Sri Radha are not to be taken lightly, because beneath all the wonderful lines, there are, so many emotions that even for men, you will understand the emotions that his words bring out after you've done a first reading, second reading. It's like a wound, you think, oh goodness, I mean, how could he say it so beautifully? It's very simple. Would you let me read 2-3 lines, which this is his own translation. This is not in the book, but I have it from my research books. It's from Sri Radha, part 58. It says, "You are the fragrance of rocks, the lamentation of each flower, the unbearable heat of the moon, the icy coolness of the blazing sun." So antithesis after antithesis, your hair you get goosebumps reading it. And then in a very short few lines translated by Jitendra Misra in The Temptress, Naika, we read, "What their readers like, balladeers write." And he continues that, "If the balladeer tells nothing but the truth, how is it that I feel your ardent breath against my dubious wealth?" Then please pause here and think of this. And this is translated by Jitendra Misra and Ratna Prabha Misra in Sri Radha Part 2, page 85. "I am nothing, stripped bare of all sustenance, with arms wide open, I am the restless void. But so what? Others too live such fates." So, you're going from emotion to emotion in all the words. And I chose one from Sindhuwala and Chandrahas Chaudhary too. And it says, "Kiss me if you wish, but just think, had we met in years bygone, would we still be asking time to give us a few moments more for the warmth of our lips? Kiss?" In Odia, as you've heard, there was never a word for love. Goodness, we said, "Mu tamaku bhalo pae." Bhalo pae means I just like you. Where prem and all came in much later. No? We never had a word for love. It's so shocking. And here I see kiss. Yes, kiss just me if you wish. It's wonderful. That's where, the translator puts in this word. But there are also very serious topics, and violence comes into his poetry too. These tetrains, beautiful, but I found what we now call war, #war, or, the UN women tell you to color the world orange, right? In Sri Radha 25, this is translated by Jitendra Nayak. It says, "Yesterday, my husband violently pulled at my hair, knocking my head against the wall again and again." And in Sri Radha 13, translated by the poet himself, he says, "How can one explain the true cause of terror or of love?" So how can terror and love be balanced together? I mean, this brings out so many emotions in you when you reread the poems. Let's pause here and think of something happier. It's the poet, he gets off and he's walking. He's come from the home of his lover and he listens to a song and he says, "Sei Gita," translated by Jitendra Misra, that song. It is the same song that has kept me captivated all my life. So the words are simple, they're lyrical, but they bring out all sorts of emotions. And what I want to say is that I just commend you, Jitendra, for bringing all these poems together out in English for the world to be able to read, right? A simple, I'm sorry, I'm really bad at all these mics and all that. Can you hear me? Sorry. And so, as it says in the introduction, we go from all kinds of, I don't know what the feminists they'll probably rave and say that, these women are all long-suffering, they put up with everything. But what do they desire? They just desire to be loved, and they question their identity. And here, the poet has said in interviews that he's taken his Radha away from the traditional Radha that we all know of. Right? It's like a tangent. I think this took courage. Angels fear to dread. You have Ramakanth Rath, going away from tradition in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I think I would just like to bring this forward for discussion later. That if he's a confessional poet, you may have read Kamla Das, right? I'm sure most of you have read Kamla Das. There are 3 lines by her which you must hear, because she says in her autobiography, "I was looking for an ideal lover. I was looking for the one who went to Mathura and forgot to return to his Radha." And so when Radha actually hears, about Krishna's death, She says, I'm not going to be like all the other widows, you know. So we have a very different Radha one who is questioning her identity. Her husband beats her up, obviously, and but she has love. And where do we draw the line between devotional love and sensuous love? I'm not calling it erotic. It could be called it has been called erotic, but sensuous love and spiritual love. Where is the line? Is there a line? Is there a Venn diagram? What happens? And why are all these women so excited every morning? Something in the air, the clouds. And Ramakanth Rath, he talks about this. It's the morning, it's the evening, the clouds, the cowherds or the cows are bellowing. There's something in nature all around him that encourages him to think that Krishna is on his way, and they wait for him in vain, as we realize later. But I just love his poetry, and thank you for bringing this out for us to read, as Sukrita said, not just those who don't speak Odia, but also in the world. I think they need to see what was being written in Odisha. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I would like to invite Professor Akshay Kale for his intervention before we open the floor for questions.
Right. I mean, it's a tough act to follow when you have such stalwarts speaking on poetry so passionately. I would just like to respond to what Professor Sukrita Paul has said about translation. I think it's such an important point. At JSLL, we have always stressed on the importance of English as a vehicular language and as a language of translation, in which literatures of not only India, but also other geographies can be accessed. So it's an interesting situation. I'm teaching modernist poetry. I told Professor Sukrita as well. But I am teaching it with an emphasis on modernismo from the Hispanic literature as well. So my students have to read poetry in translation, and all of them, well, as Professor Misra has rightly pointed out, that poetry itself is not that. There's a reticence towards poetry in general. I think it's not only amongst a particular people. I think in general there's a resistance to poetry because of the difficulty it involves, because it asks you to surrender to the text, as she rightly pointed out. So this surrender is very difficult because it entails an exercise of humility. So poetry requires humility, actually. There is no room for hubris while reading poetry. That's what I think. And while as far as translated poetry is concerned, I always quote one person who was, interestingly, was ambassador in India, ex-ambassador from Mexico, Octavio Paz, Nobel Prize-winning poet. I mean, must have met him in person also in India, I'm very sure. He was in India in 1990s, in 1990 concretely, I think. And he has a very apt quote regarding this. What he says is that what gets translated is poetry. So if the poetic text in itself is meritorious, as we see in these translations of Ramakanth, although there is a cacophony of translators, you still get something, you can take something away from the poems because the original text is vibrant and replete with meaning. So that in itself is the ultimate sort of test of literary merit in many ways, whether a poem can stand translation. Not all poems survive in translation, obviously. I mean, a poem like Wasteland, for example, if one tries to translate it into Marathi, I would never do it. I have been asked to translate Cesar Vallejo, a poet whom I've extensively worked upon. I denied flatly because I thought that particular poems cannot be translated. I mean, they are beyond the ken of the translator. But most world literature can be translated. So that reaffirms our faith in translations and the whole exercise that he has undertaken, that Professor Misra has undertaken. And it's a labor of love. I was going to say the exact words. You can see that it's a labor of love because most translations, including mine, were commissioned. So I can't really claim that they were done with the utmost, let's say, with the utmost integrity, yes, but not with the utmost passion, maybe, because it's just not the same. And that's...
Sometimes love comes after marriage.
Exactly. So that's the difference between advertisement and art, right? Like advertisements use artistic elements, but it's not art because there's a clear motive going behind it. So I really like the way, I was commenting this as well, the way the book is divided into 4 sections thematically. It's a bold choice. It's a choice which not many people dare to do because it's a poet who has been writing around, I think, 20 years or 25 years. Yes, 30 books. So it's a very onerous exercise. I myself have dabbled with anthologizing, although nothing concretely has come out of it, which means I'm quite bad at it. But clearly, Professor Misra has done a fantastic job in the anthology itself and thematically organizing it. I wanted to talk about the poetry more concretely, primarily because my students are in attendance, and one of the constant refrains in all my classes is you have to buttress your answers with examples. So I think it's only fair that I support my contentions with some concrete examples, because this is like make poetry great again, to appropriate certain slogan. The four sections are aptly titled Love and Longing, which is the first section, which is an extensive which is extensively composed of poems from Sri Radha, which is like the most emblematic collection, most popular collection of Ramakanth Rath. The second section is a brief interlude. I like how it involves only 4 poems, but sorrow can only be so voluminous. I mean, there is something about sorrow which can be compact and condensed, but then it reminds me also of Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. So the second section is very compressed, and it's about death and it's about sorrow, but it's almost as if it's there and it has to be dealt with dignity, but there are other things we have to think about. And precisely the next section is consciousness. So I think in Odia, what would Chetna, right? The same as in Hindi. Chetna, yeah, exactly. So, and the last section is war and death. I was particularly drawn by the section on sorrow. For example, the river, on the poem By That River, which you can find on page 67 of the book. So I'm going to read out this poem because there's particularly one word which I'm very interested in, and the way it has been translated as well. So this poem is By That River, E Nai Kulare, I think, right? E Noi Kulare. Yeah, thanks. Somewhere along the river, a song comes to life. And elsewhere in this gloomy valley, the sun is bleeding. At yet another place, fragments of a broken boat joined together, and you are restored in my embrace, lighting a lamp and illuminating remembered alleys. Again, later on in the poem, you have, I could hear the music of your voice beyond anything I could imagine, helping the fragments of my life come together into one as I hover around your breath, searching by the river for a past smeared with many deaths. My future is lost in the voices of sleeping birds. The operative word for me here is, and I'm sorry if I'm being too much in the professor mode right now, but the operative word here is fragments. And it's no coincidence that it's repeated twice. It's mentioned twice because these are the very fragments which Eliot talks about. These are the fragments that I shore upon my ruins. I think Ramakanth Rath similarly evokes an apocalyptic mood. And although I've read articles where he's said to be more in the vein of confessional poets, leaving behind the influence of Pound and Eliot, I still think that apocalyptic quality is there throughout. His entire reticent, surly persona, I think, ties in with that bleak vision of humanity, and bleak in the sense that it's brooding upon something which is yet to come, a rebirth, a regeneration, and at the same time it is nostalgic for a past which it's trying to reclaim through the poem as well. So fragments aren't necessarily a bad thing, and these fragments will come together, but it will come together in a voice which is not really apprehensible, right? So it's the voice of sleeping birds. So it's again a comment on the futility of language, but at the same time, as I always said, these modernist poems, they work upon the dialectic of futility and fertility. So you have to realize the futility of something in order to realize how it can be, what can be beyond the swamp. You know, it's as a Maria Zambrano, a Spanish philosopher, who was also a poet, says that reading poetry is like dipping your hands into the swamp. You never know what is going to come to hand. And I think it's working with that sort of dynamic. Ramakanth Rath is pointing towards these pregnant possibilities of language through, ironically, the barrenness of this landscape. I just have one more poem to comment, which I think was my of the limited poems, I mean, I've had a limited overview of his poetry, but I think it's been quite exhaustive, through this book. But I just want to talk about also one of the poems from War and from, I think it's War and Death. And this is Sri Patalaka 37 on page 135. He read out the preceding poem, Sri Patalaka 36. I also wanted to ask him about why runaway and why not escapist, which I've seen in other translations. Is there any difference, or was it
I have been respectful towards Ramakanth Ratha because he titled it Mr. Runaway. I would put the title Mr. Escapist, like you. But
Why?
it is
Yeah.
purely just out of respect. And as we heard from Sukrita ji, the poet is alive, and that makes it so much harder for all of us.
So I just wanted to read out fragments from this poem. This is a long poem, but then I like the way it starts. So it's Mr. Runaway number 37. Do not count the number of corpses. Comfort yourself with this: the dead were never even born, nor did they ever play the games of children or raise homes. Once they were gone, the human count remained exactly as before. But why would a soldier, veteran of many fights and many duels, shake in fear? Did they even exist? And if they did, they rode far away in trains and trucks with no food and no drink. The body that clings to you, or clasps your hands, or twists around your feet is not flesh or blood. The sound by the ear is merely the soft air, or perhaps the echo of an exploding cannon or bomb that fired in the past ages, but we only now hear. So what if the air these days smells of gunpowder? So what if the moon always appears to rise from the marshes? So what if the sky is filled with dark clouds? Those were the days when we stood erect, our heads held high. So what if the time to grovel has arrived? So what if the time to grovel has arrived? Must you not, the one who once only wore silk, one day wrap yourself in a simple piece of cloth as you prepare to bid farewell to your children and grandchildren on their final journey? Again, you can see the impact of these lines in English. I'm not doing a very good job reciting them. They can be recited much better. But I think the Oriya, you can see the power is in the rhythm as well. And that is because it's a brilliant translation by Professor Mishra and his wife, Ratha Mishra. Yeah, please. Yeah.
In Odia,
Yes. Sure. Please go ahead. Yeah.
we'll lose the moment.
Absolutely.
ନିହତ ଲୋକଙ୍କ ସଂଖ୍ୟା ଗଣ ନାହିଁ, ନିଜକୁ ବୁଝାଅ। ସେମାନେ କଦାପି ଜନ୍ମ ହୋଇନଥିଲେ, କି କଦାପି ପିଲାଙ୍କ ଖେଳ ଖେଳି ନଥିଲେ, କି ତାଙ୍କର ଘର ସଂସାର କଦାପି ନଥିଲା। ପୃଥିବୀର ଜନସଂଖ୍ୟା ଆଗରୁ ଯେତିକି ଥିଲା, ତାଙ୍କ ଯିବା ପରେ ସେତିକି ରହିଲା। ଜୀବନରେ ବାରମ୍ବାର ଯୁଦ୍ଧ କରିଥିବା ଲୋକ କାହିଁକି ଥରିବ? ଏମାନେ ତ କଦାପି ନଥିଲେ, ଥିଲେ ମଧ୍ୟ ରେଳଗାଡ଼ି ବା ଟ୍ରକରେ ଅଖିଆପିଆ କାହିଁ କେତେ ଦୂର ଚାଲିଗଲେ? ପବନରେ ଆଜିକାଲି ସବୁବେଳେ ଯଦି ବାରୁଦର ଗନ୍ଧ କ'ଣ ହେଲା? ଜହ୍ନ ଯଦି ସବୁବେଳେ କାଦୁଅ ଭିତରୁ ଉଠିଥିବା ପରି ଦେଖାଯାଏ, କ'ଣ ହେଲା? କ'ଣ ହେଲା ଯଦି ପ୍ରାଚୀର ପତ୍ରରେ ଆକାଶ ପୂର୍ଣ୍ଣ ହୋଇଯାଏ? ମୁଣ୍ଡ ଟେକି ଚାଲିଥିବା ଦିନ ଥିଲା, ଏବେ ମୁଣ୍ଡ ପୋତି ଚାଲିବାର ଦିନ ଆସିଲା, ତ କ'ଣ ହେଲା? ପଟବସ୍ତ୍ର ଦିନେ ପିନ୍ଧୁଥିଲ, ଦିନେ ତ ତମକୁ କରିଆ ଗାମୁଛା ପିନ୍ଧି ଯିବାକୁ ପଡ଼ିବ ପୁଅ ନାତିଙ୍କର ଶବ ଦାହ କରିବାକୁ।
I'll just, I mean, if you see here, just one observation on this. So what if the time to grovel has arrived? You know, this is the ultimate sort of, there's also another poem which is called The Mendicant Sannyasi. This is all, it's not a plea to austerity, but it is a realization, a conscious realization that one has to let go and there has to be a disrobing which is, and there's a beautiful word in Hindi for it as well, Bailey Bus, to become like, to disrobe oneself. And that is something which is not done easily. You can't reach that stage of reflection unless you have lived a full life. Or you have lived a life, and not only in terms of years, but a life in terms of experiences as well. When you come full circle. So that you see this from the very sensuous poetry of Sri Radha, you come to this sort of, this is very reminiscent of Pathar Panchali, at the Aput Trilogy at the end, when he just lets go of his work and surrenders to the abyss. So this is a homologous image in poetry. That's all. I would be delighted to hear what you have to say about it as well. Thanks.
We have one more intervention from Professor Kumar, and then we can perhaps go ahead with it.
Yeah, I just thought that, somehow I ran away. Run away is the key word. I ran away with the idea of translation more than the content completely. And I just want to comment a little bit on that, if I may. So I, in fact, was reminded of that by just a couple of words that I had written here, which is to do with how, in this case, in Sri Radha, and I took the cue from your introduction, I think, where you're talking about how there is this agency of Sri Radha, of Radha, which I think is something we must remember in this poem, because it's not a lamenting Radha who is saying, oh my God, when is Krishna going to come? Krishna has not come. It's not like that at all. It's not even mushy kind of, sentimentalism that it dwindles to. It doesn't. It is a very important point in the context of one of the lines that I was reading. Absence does not matter. Now, Sri Krishna is not present, and she says it does not matter because she is fully in command of herself. And she says, I can make the moon come into the skies, So you see a gradual kind of a sense of empowerment that you witness here in the way Radha is depicted in this particular poem. And in fact, that is why I carried this, which I'm not going to talk about it. This is another poem on Radha, Listen Radhika. And this is by Madhav Kaushik. Yeah, so this has just been translated. And this is, in this, the image of Radha is very different. So it just depends on how you interpret Radha also, and how Radha's depiction has been done. It's a very eventually in consciousness. The Radha that we see in that section is a meditative Radha, a Radha who can exist in contradictions, in paradoxes, I don't have the time to go on into examples, but if you read the poem carefully, you see how there are contradictions, and they are reconcilable contradictions, which we always have in life itself. There are contradictions that we have to look at. But there's another point that I thought I would just quickly mention here, which is that there are these though there is a reference to dream, but there is validity of dream as reality, And the psychologist tells you to believe in that, isn't it? It's a deeper reality, right? So in the way, in the poetic way, the concreteness of dream is established, right? That it's very concrete, it's real to the person who is dreaming. So this kind of weaving of words which can bring the abstract into a concrete reality is what you see here. And that's the content throughout. And the meditativeness that you see of Radha out here, that of course there are tinges of that also in the beginning, right in the beginning of the sound of the flute, for instance, and all pervasive sound, and how that sound eventually leads her to a void, V-O-I-D, void, not avoid, but void. Now, in this, then eventually a statement comes, but this void is you. That void itself is you. You have nothing more to say then. You have nothing more to say, right? This is what, modernists have been talking about it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
This whole question of nothing comes out of nothing.
I've written a quote in Spanish.
Nothing, yes. The concept of nothing.
Just wrote down the quote in Spanish, El abismo eres tú, which means the void is you. Yeah.
To the audience.
Actually, this is a question I also had. The feeling of futility, of nothingness, the void is like present throughout the book, the poems. How could you reflect on that? How is it different from emptiness? Are both of them the same, or are they different? And also, how is it different? How nothingness is different from the feeling of being nothing?
Is that for me or anyone?
Go ahead if you.
I'll say something
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
before I forget. I'm getting old. Thank you. The concept of nothing or being nothing is actually being something. Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, no less, the great Prime Minister, the great underappreciated Prime Minister of India, said that. When asked a question, Prime Minister, you don't have any policy and you haven't been doing anything. You do nothing about this particular issue, nothing. And you don't say anything, nothing. He said, no, I have a policy. I have a very clear policy because doing nothing is doing something. So the difference between nothingness and emptiness, as Raghav, I think you mentioned, is very important. Emptiness is, well, emptiness. Nothing is not nothing. Nothing is something. For example, in the poetry, when I have read and reread this, the concept of nothing, I don't exist, you don't exist, I Radha going towards you, when I'm getting near you, you're not even there. And when I'm on my journey, I'm also not there. The whole world is nothing. Nothing exists. And everything is futile. Everything is preordained. Everything has already been decided. It's a set piece. There's nothing that we can contribute. So this concept of nothing is very Buddhist. And think of Aryabhatta. Think of Brahmagupta, who between them, mathematics and astronomy, the two geniuses of the first millennium in this world, the two greatest geniuses perhaps, in science and mathematics. The shunya is a dot, the shunya becomes a circle, and the decimal system is developed by Indians in relation to the shunya. Relative, it's all relative. And Einstein develops his theory of relativity probably on that basis, from mathematics, from what the Indians discovered, well, not discovered, but conceptualized and developed as an argument and as something. So Ramakant Ratha is like that. He's, also a heightened level of experience. When he's talking of nothing, and he's talking of the void, Sri Radha, half the poems are talking about a void. Lovers melting in a void in deep space. Wow. So, for example, I'll read a passage. It's transcendental. That is how he would meet his end. His clothes falling off. There would be no return as the landscape changed from cremation ghats to clouds in a new time zone. You are traversing centuries. You are traversing millennia. You are probably traversing deep space. And I'm reminded of that great film called Contact by Robert Zemeckis with Jodie Foster. The film is about a time machine that travels at the speed of sound, and she goes to Vega. But she can't prove it, but she does. So he's talking about, as I seize in the void that is you. And the concept of nothing, or the word nothing, is recurrent. 50 times in this collection, I read the word nothing. So that is very important. And everything is a void. When you stood alone, gazing at the darkness, as if nothing existed, as I stumble each day into a search for things, all around me, knowing very well that I shall find nothing. Or, quote, nothing was mine, not my body, not the canon of my past hopes or disappointments. Then suddenly he talks of galaxies, quote, galaxies, one after another, appeared like the rising turf, but very soon receded in the soft, unbending light like waves. This is how I visualized Jodie Foster traveling in that machine when you saw those kaleidoscopic colors, very bright lights, utter darkness, dark holes, all kinds of things in real science. So I'm connecting Ramakant Rath poetry to science, to astronomy, to mathematics, to cinema, obviously. So it's everything. It's a cocktail of everything, and that's the kind of genius he is.
Thank you, sir. Since we have only 5-10 minutes left, I would like to invite the audience.
I think, Sukrita, you wanted to say.
No, you said it. I mean, basically, I just wanted to refer to, as you said, shunyata.
Shunyata.
I mean, we have to remember that Ramakant Rath is actually talking about shunyata, not nothing in the context of existentialism. So we have to remember the context. It's very, very important. And if you go to shunyata, then shunyata brings around with itself a whole bunch of philosophy, a baggage of philosophy. And that philosophy is, as you rightly said, is kind of spread out throughout. And in fact, there's at one point when she's saying that everything is an illusion except for you. And you are absent. Now, is that a contradiction? Everything else is an illusion but for you. And you are absent, So if you are absent, then that illusion has the void, isn't it? So it's very interesting to go deeper into it, and you see that there is a process of meditation behind this, It's all meditation. And in fact, the colors that you're talking about, that there is a reference to this in the poem itself, that there are multiple colors all around. It's almost like kaleidoscopic reality, which you see or you imagine. It's an imaginary that has been built up in a very concrete way. So,
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. This concept of shun is very significant because, and I'm glad you brought it up, because none other than Mukti Bodh, one of the best poets in any language in the 20th century, has a poem which is called Shunya, which is translated as the void in English. I don't know, it would be translated as zero as well, just zero, but maybe it won't be. So he just says in this poem that the void inside us is jaws, and I scatter this void. So that's what I was referring to with Ramakath's poetry as well. He's scattering the void. He's scattering the ashes, but it's in if this image for us is not really bleak. It's because you scatter it into the Ganga. I mean, the images of scattering it into something which will regenerate and reboot, so to say, civilization itself.
unlike
Right.
nihilistic, philosophy.
Right. Thanks.
Some sense you are the universe. I would like to invite the audience for any questions, comments, clarifications.
Yes.
Getting old, right? And one thing that happens is that old memories become very vivid. And in this case, I was trying to think, when did I first hear of Ramakant Rath? And it comes back to me. I was doing a project for the Ford Foundation with the IGNCA and Kapila Vatsayan on Jayadeva's Gita Govinda. It's a multimedia project where you could get on the computer screen all the various ways in which that song is recited all over India, all the art forms that it inspired, Pahadi paintings and other paintings, and the literature that was associated with it. And it's that time I remember a conversation with Kapila ji, and she said you must read Sri Radha of Ramakanth Rath. Because Jayadeva's Gita Govinda is very different. But yet, she said you'll find that there's something in it, right? So that's when I first heard of this poet, and I remember that, at that time looking at it, I don't have very, it's not very vivid, as I said initially. It's about, we were talking about Krishna's color, Neela, Megha, Shyamala, and I think somewhere in his poem, there's a reference to blue. You must be blue. Huh? You must be blue. I am blue. I wear blue. Right? That came back to me, and I just thought it's wonderful to be part of this kind of a conversation. And there's something that only only poetry can convey. It can't be done by any other form of human expression, I think. And Ramakanta is an outstanding example of how to convey that sort of thing. It's also incidentally, that was a time when there was a popular song called Blue Blue. I'm feeling blue without you, right? Something like that.
I was just listening to everyone, and Professor Suprita was talking about this idea of when you translate, sometimes you just got to leave the stuff out there. And if people, because you're not writing it for people who will not make the effort to read, right? And I was also thinking about it, and the first time that I'd come across something similar was in Chinno Achebe's book, where he has this particular phrase which has become very famous now. He says, proverbs are the palm oil with which words are eaten, right? And the first time I came across it, it was, I was like, what? It sounds so weird in English. But then if you get into the idea that, this is something, palm oil is something deeply embedded in Biafran culture, and you understand the context, then it starts to make sense, and you're like, yeah, why not? Why can English not be used in this fashion, right? So I think it's just a sort of thought as you were speaking. This is something that came up, but that was one of my first encounters with the usage of the language in a fashion which was not, like you said, His Majesty's voice, right? So, yeah. And I look forward to actually reading this, because it was all the readings were deeply affective in a way which I think, like Professor Sudarshan said, can only happen with poetry, right? Yeah, just still collecting my thoughts. Yeah, thanks.
Khushwant Singh had translated Rajendra Singh Bedi's novel Ek Chadar Maili Si, very well known. And he published it in one or two chapters were published in the Illustrated Weekly of India. And at that time, I was very anglicized myself. And I was an adolescent and doing English honors, MA, literature, etc., So when I read that, I said, oh my God, this fellow doesn't know English or what, He had translated a Punjabi, that particular novel is full of galis, abuses left, right and center, and Punjabi galis. So one of the galis is like khasmanu khani, right? That is your husband eater. He translated it as husband eater. And he said, you husband eater, and things like that. Now, I was reacting to it wildly. I said, this is not the way to translate, You can surely find some equivalent in English he could find, But, we have to remember now, and that's a point in translation. We have to remember that if you displace the word from the context, and bring in an Americanism there, say be, and then that line, and we used to do it nowadays bastard is used as bastard, but we used to do be and then line, so F and then line, things like that. So now what is happening is we have become aware as people of translation that if even the abuses, humor, irony, all these things have a cultural context, and you cannot displace it. Let it be husband eater. Then you will be intrigued and you will say, okay, what is the Punjabi? That's your Punjabi abuse. Get to know about it, you know. Make an effort, find out.
Thank you, ma'am. That's quite interesting, actually. Any other questions or comments? I would like to invite Ambassador Mishra for his final intervention for the day.
I've said enough. All I will say is that this has been very encouraging. Some people have left, of course, but in the middle of this discussion, we had a full house, and I didn't expect that, frankly. I was considerably worried because it's poetry. Poetry has a very passionate following, but among a certain people, not among everybody. So this was fantastic, and a lot of food for thought. And it goes to show that Jindal is on the right track, sir. School of Languages and Literature, and School of Liberal Arts, and JII, you are integrating all of us into an interdisciplinary center that gets the best out of Jindal, all the schools and all the knowledge. And sir, you, of course, Rhodes Scholar and one of the most, if not the most distinguished persons here. He's a guru, he's the sage, and he's there everywhere. He's the dean, he has to run his school, but he's always there, looking serene and very calm and has all the time in the world, a lot of lessons. So we want Jindal to be like that. So I'm not going to speak more about the book. There's a lot more, but there's no time. But Raghav, I would like to thank you in particular, and before you have the final word, and to express my gratitude because you personally have put this all together with a great deal of passion and commitment and a lot of effort. And I'd like to thank Vanshika and everybody else.